and I got involved the following day because, as you know, the test umpires were selected by the county captains. And before the season started, we'd get this list of all the marks of the umpires. And each year, Sid Buller was the top, and probably, frankly, would be about number 2, something like that. But Sid was always at the top anyhow. And it was, you know, we selected, therefore, I mean, I can't remember whether we selected more than the 2, but we certainly selected those 2. But then when there were no balled, this created a problem because the opposing side were allowed to say that they did not want to have a particular umpire, and they didn't even have to say why. And this was apparently in the regulations. I mean, and to have a quorum of the county captains, I think we must have been, Donald Carr and I were the only 2 captains left in London. We were playing against Surrey, and Derbyshire must have been playing against Middlesex, whichever way around it was. And so we were ushered under quietly into Ronnie Add's house. We came into the ground early in the morning and went through the gate into the house. And Ronnie Add read the rules and said, look, you know, the manager and Jackie want to come and talk about umpires. And if they object, you have to agree. You have no choice. And they do not have to say why. And Jackie came in and said, we don't want Sid Buller to umpire. And so poor old Sid then, you know, he was removed. And although I know you've got a slightly different view to me, I believe that this affected Sid significantly. And to me it was, and I think probably to most, if not all, first-class English cricketers at the time, it was very, very sad.
Yes. Bob, can I add to that? I think I completely hear what you're saying, and I'm sure it's true. He was paid for, he was due to umpire 3 test matches that summer, and he was paid for all 3, although he only stood in the Lord's test match. And he was back on the test panel the next year, and indeed remained on the test panel, I think, the rest of his life. And it is interesting that on the 58-9 tour to Australia, the MCCs at England side were very dissatisfied with Mel McInnes, the Australian umpire. And I don't think, well, whether they did or didn't object, I'm not 100% certain, but McInnes was eventually removed for the last test match of that tour. He didn't umpire in the 5th one. And I think it is Ian Peebles who makes the point in one of his books that he says that really McInnes, it wasn't that he couldn't see somebody throwing, it was he became completely bemused about almost every decision. He made some very poor run-out decisions towards the end, I think the 3rd and 4th test matches. And he was eventually removed for the 5th test. Whether England had objected to him before that, I don't know. I'm not certain.
I don't know, Robin, whether, you know, the regulations which were applicable when we were playing South Africa in that series, I've no idea at all whether they were the same regulations for all test series. It was not unusual for, you know, in those days, you had local umpires. Yeah. And us English were rather arrogant, saying, well, we believe that, you know, our fellows are better because they have more experience of first-class cricket than these people, whether they're in Australia, South Africa, India, Pakistan, Windies, or wherever, which is really a little bit, you know, looking back, it is somewhat arrogant, but But whether the regulations were the same, I couldn't pass any comment, and you'd have to check on that.
Again, as a footnote, it's worth making, the year I was in Australia, 70-71, it's worth making the point on that tour, England didn't get a single LBW decision in 7 test matches, or one reigned of 6 test matches, not one.
Yeah, I know. Can I just throw in Tony Locke for a second? Because he's a significant figure in this, because he stops England being squeaky clean on this issue. Yeah. And Bob, you played against him a lot over the years. What's your view of Tony Locke and his action, that, as you saw it?
Well, the first time I saw Tony Locke was when he first played for Surrey, when he got a head full of fair hair, and he bowled donkey drops at the time. And then the next time I saw him was within my first season, 54, was going out to bat at the Oval. And he bowled one, and I played forward defensive. And then the next one, the only thing I remember was it clipped my left ear as it was going through to Arthur back. And it was like a rocket. He had a very, very strong arm, did Lockie. And I'm sure you know very well about the tale about how he, once the Jamaicans, was it, had subscribed to George Headley going back the Black Bradman, and how Lockie disposed of him by letting the ball go a couple of yards behind the bowling crease, lining up the bowling umpire with square legs so they couldn't see, and George Headley's stumps went flying all over the shop. And, there was no doubt that Tony Locke was a very powerful thrower. He did, I'd say, be fair to him, I mean, we toured together in India, and by that stage, he'd stopped the throwing, and he bowled beautifully. And he wasn't bowling donkey drops either. So he could bowl, but I ought to add to you, Stephen, that Tony Locke was not the only suspect bowler in the English side at the time. There was a question mark about every so often you'd get a rather faster ball from Peter Loader. And so he was considered also to be doubtful.
Bob, am I right in saying that the problem with throwers, I've faced a couple in my life, it's not the chap who throws every ball, you can cope with that, it's the one who throws the occasional ball. And that's the problem with throwers.
Yes, I agree, although every ball also, I mean, you see, to me, there's an awful lot of people throwing the ball now.
Yeah, I get it.
I mean, you can't really look at any team, and it seems to me that half of the bowlers are chucky, and particularly, I mean, some who bowl perfectly legitimately, and then they let their, well, I don't know whether they call it a bouncer. I mean, it's almost the ball pitches in their half of the pitch, and you know, you just look at their arm. But to me, there's a number of things, Stephen, and you know, I think all this business about the number of degrees and the rest of it was missing the point. And this applies to the dragging as well. You see, as a young fellow, I used to throw a javelin. I gave it up to play cricket. Well, in terms of the dragging, I mean, it's not difficult. You knew you had to throw behind a line, and you did. It's no problem at all, and so could bowlers. But in the same way as if as a bowler you teach a boy to bowl, and I'm assuming that we're accepting that the game is a sideways game, as we say, and they swing their arm over vertically. Now, if you in fact consider where the elbow is pointing,
Yeah.
it is pointing towards, roughly towards mid-on, or just in front of mid-on. But the chukker is not. The elbow is pointing down the wicket. That's how you throw
A javelin.
a javelin.
Absolutely.
And it's pointing down the wicket. And if they'd only actually focused on where the hell the elbow was pointing, I don't think they'd have got into the problems they have. And it's the same with this doosra. I mean, we used to use that in the dressing room when we were so frequently rained off. We'd use a lacrosse ball and play dead bat to practice playing on wet wickets. And if you get a ball and throw it like that, it spins legs.
Yep.
As a leg spin, and that way is off spin. And again, but it's where is the elbow pointing? And I find it's I find it all rather sad. And the other thing which you look at in today's game is look at where their feet are pointing. Look where their right foot is pointing when they're delivering the ball.
Yeah.
It's pointing down the wicket. Now, you look at Fred Truman, somebody who's got a classical action like that, and his right leg was square, not pointing down the wicket. Now, I suspect that some of that may be because some of them have said, oh, we got back problems or whatever. And it's to ease that, but it did not make it easier to throw. I mean, I practiced this when I was at Cambridge. And I went in the nets and I could make a few people jump. But it was through using my javelin technique. And but it's become very much a part of the game now, and I think it's very, very sad.
Bob, you're absolutely right. I know as a schoolmaster coach, watching children bowl, and one of the things I always do, because you had to umpire matches, obviously, you look at where the front foot lands and how it lands. And the bowler who comes up, whose front foot lands pointing towards the gully, you know he's going to throw because his whole chest has opened up and the arm comes over bent. And to me, like as you say, if the back foot is square on, it's going to be pretty good. If the front foot is pointing towards down the wicket or at fine leg, it's going to be pretty good because he'll pivot on that. But the bowler who comes up with the back foot straight and the front foot pointing towards the gully, you know there's going to be a problem. And so often it was.
Look where Charlie Griffiths' feet were pointing.
And Charlie Griffiths is the best example of that. Yeah, absolutely. And you face.
Well, let's take it forward now, because that's fascinating, and we haven't really, as you say, we find different ways of trying to deal with this, and now the problem has been taken away from the umpires to a large extent, and they deal with it away by looking at it on film and deciding who's banned from bowling. But the solutions that were being discussed in that summer of 1960, I'm fascinated by the portrait of Bradman and his letters to your grandfather, all terribly friendly until things aren't going his way.
Yes. One particular letter
and then the letter got unpleasant. And I think, Bob, before we came on air, you made a comparison between Harry Altham and Don Bradman in their approach to cricket. Perhaps you'd like to repeat that.
I just said that I thought that Don Bradman was a little bit more competitive than Harry was.
Well, it certainly comes through in the letters.
That's
Harry's doing his best to be
diplomatic. I think it's again, as a cricket historian, it's worthwhile making the point that I don't think Bradman ever forgave England for bodyline. I really don't, and I think that is at the heart of his whole approach to cricket. I mean, his approach certainly in 48, that he was going to crush, and he had the ability to crush England, and he wanted to do so and did so. And I hesitate to say that England made it easier for him by having a new ball after 65 overs, but he set out to do so. Now, you only got to go on to 74-5 and look at Lilly and Thompson. And what did Lilly and Thompson bowl? They bowled bodyline effectively without the bodyline field, which they couldn't produce. But there was not a murmur of complaint from Bradman about it, nor indeed when the West Indies started to bowl in the 80s with 4 quick bowlers. And, you know, you were lucky to get anything. You know, the idea of a half volley from the West Indies was absolutely inconceivable.
Yeah, well, let's just stay with Brad. We're coming to the end of the time of the three of us talking, and we're going to bring in some questions. But perhaps, Bob, it's a good moment to your meeting with Don Bradman, I think, occurred. Was it after you played that most wonderful innings of yours, the 185 at Sydney? Was that the occasion that Don Bradman spoke to you?
Yeah, well, yes, it was actually. I was, I'd watched Don Bradman in that 48 series at Old Trafford. I'd watched him get his last 100 at Scarborough, where my father sat me on the external wall, which had got glass embedded on it, and he put his Mac on it so that I could sit on it and watch. So this great man, it amazed me that I was talking to my father, and I was told that the Don would like to come and talk to me, and he did, and I was so overawed with this. I was amazed that he should deign to come down to my level, but he was very kind, very nice indeed. But I never had the chance to really have a natter to him at all, which is a pity. But,
you remember what he said? Do you remember what he said?
No, not really. Well, he was very complimentary. I suppose one of the nicest things I remember of that tour, and he didn't say the same words, but when we played at Melbourne, and the newspaper had a cartoon saying that I was the only person who could empty the bars in Aussie.
Well, it's worthwhile telling the story of when the team arrived in Australia for the first time, and you had to fill out the immigration forms. And of the 17 tourists, 15 of them, duly purpose of visit, wrote down play cricket. Boycott wrote down business, and you wrote down holiday. And I think that sums up everything that needs to be said.
Wonderful.
You need to know, Robin, that we'd stopped off in what was then, I think it was still Ceylon rather than Sri Lanka, and I think Geoffrey had caught a bug, and when we were about, I think he flew after us to Aussie. He was left there in bed, and any case, myself and Eric Russell, and probably John Edrich as well, decided that we'd go in and speak to Geoffrey and wish him well as sort of openers, potential openers in the tour. And Geoffrey he'd said, instead of appreciating us coming in and saying, get well soon, whatever, he made some aggressive comment like, and I'll get your so-and-so place or something. And I said, well, as far as I was concerned, Geoffrey, if I could spend the next 2 or 3 months on the beach, it would suit me fine.
Well, I think this has been a most, I hope the viewers have enjoyed this as much as I have. I'll better give a quick plug for the book, which is £12 from Chris Saunders, and I think it's in the chat attached to the meeting, the details. So I had to contact Chris by phone or email. The Altham-Bradman Letters, fascinating insight into cricket history 60 years ago, and a beautifully written memoir of Harry Altham by you, Robin, at the beginning. And then also Malcolm Lorimer says he still has some copies of the book that Bob brought out, 4 or 5 years ago, was it now, Bob?
Well, it wasn't,
Yes.
I didn't bring it out. I mean, Colin Schindler,
Yeah,
all
Colin
I did
Schindler
was
wrote
sit and
this
ask
book.
questions.
That's right. And he still has some copies, which he's selling at the remarkably bargain price of £7. And they're signed copies. And I remember you sitting in the library at Old Trafford the day you were signing them, Bob. You seemed to be in there all day.
Yes.
So he still has some signed copies, and highly recommended as well. So 2 plugs for the books there. And back to you, Nick, to bring in 1 or 2 questions, I think, isn't it?